say that the media, let's take Syria, for example, and here again, I agree with you, but I want you to explain what you mean. You're talking about this idea that the media are and have been misleading us regarding Syria, and you say that part of that has to do with this movement of much of the news reporting coming from Washington, not from people that are in the field. Talk about that a little bit.
The Syria situation, in my mind, is really a shameful episode in the history of the American press,
Yes.
in addition to the tragedy that it is for the Syrians. And it's part of something bigger, as you just mentioned. The fact is, there are very few foreign correspondents left for major American news media. There are others who are working on their own, but they don't really penetrate into the Washington echo chamber. So much of the news that we get about the world, and particularly about crisis spots like Syria, actually is generated in Washington. It doesn't come from Syria. So you have reporters in Washington who check their sources every day to write their Syria story. And their sources are the State Department, the Pentagon, maybe an embassy, then there's the think tanks, and then maybe an ambassador, and then you've covered the landscape. So you've talked to everybody, you've covered all sides. Actually, you haven't talked to any sides. You've just talked to all the same people in the same little echo chamber. The United States and the Obama administration has an interest in projecting a certain narrative about what's happening in Syria. And it has to do with the evil dictator stomping down on the brave, moderate rebels who only want to create Switzerland there, with Thomas Jefferson waiting in the wings to replace the brutal torturer. So if you don't share that narrative, if you start questioning it and writing stories that produce another narrative, you are frozen out of Washington. You don't get invited to the think tank meetings. You don't get your phone calls returned. You don't get interviews. Now, if you were out covering a story, it wouldn't matter that people in offices wouldn't speak to you, because you'd be out there seeing the story on your own. But when it comes to Syria, that's not the case. The people writing about Syria, the people that are telling us what's happening in Syria, are largely based in Washington. So I warn readers always to look at the dateline when you're reading stories about the rest of the world. And if you are reading about a foreign crisis and what's really happening there, and the dateline is Washington, you should be suspicious.
That makes sense to me. And I would have to ask, I mean, you mentioned the economics of this, that sometimes there's cutbacks and, so we have to take some of these people out of the field. But I would be the cynic and say, doesn't this also play into the larger effort where we are trying to portray a particular story? So if we've got these people in Washington, instead of in the field displaying what's happening accurately, that's really the desired result we wanted in the first place.
Absolutely. I think it serves the interests of the policy to have fewer people on the ground reporting what's happening. And it's also feeding the tendency to focus the reporting on what happened today.
Yes.
So you'll see stories about Syria saying a hospital was blown up. It was awful. The pediatrician was killed. A baby died. And then they ripped the whole oxygen unit apart. But you don't really understand. So who's behind this? What's the larger story? So in this case, as so often in covering foreign conflicts, news is really the enemy of information. News is what's happening right now. But what's happening today in Syria right now is not the important story. What's more important, first of all, is what happened yesterday. How did we get here? What's the reason that this is happening? And secondly, what's going to happen tomorrow? What is the result of what we're seeing today? But when you're so focused on just reporting the events of the hour, which the news cycle in some cases demands, then I think you pull back from reporting the larger story. And that's what has left Americans in so much real ignorance about what's happening in Syria.